Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 30th, 2019. Time for yet another show. Stuck here in the polar vortex. I don't even know if this is the coldest weather we're supposed to get or whether it's supposed to get worse, but the schools are closed, and so we'll hear a little bit of rattling around in the background, no doubt. Very cold here, probably very cold where you are as well. A little bit of snow on the ground for us, a little bit more to come. Not a huge deal, but, this is the sort of thing that closes school these days. Why, back in my day, I don't know. No matter where you're from, you probably weren't having schools closed this much. And, of course, that means global warming can't be real, et cetera, because something about weather and climate, and we don't even know what's happening here. All right, they're rolling out all the old excuses. There's plenty more to discuss. There's no convincing people who make their money by denying science. However, there are an awful lot of them. So we'll point out, I guess, where it happens, just so that you're aware of it. If that's something you want to spend your time on, by all means, do your best to convince them. But apparently, most of them are lost to this. Most of them are lost to everything. I've been watching with some interest this morning a very interesting clip that I guess has been circulated by Now This News, and interesting clip from Davos, although I do feel like we see these clips every year, and I don't know whether it makes any real difference, but each year someone, I guess, is required to say to the billionaires at Davos that they're not doing a very good job running the world, and that they ought to contribute more of their money to the betterment of that world, and they all get very uncomfortable. But there's an interesting exchange here between, let's see, there's a historian and the chair of Oxfam and a former CEO of Yahoo, which is an interesting combination. He's not on the panel. He's questioning the panel. He's very upset with the panel members who are saying, well, really, if you want to address inequality globally, you're just going to have to talk, at the very least, about tax avoidance, if not necessarily the increase in marginal tax rates, although that's a hot topic here in the United States. And the CEO of Yahoo is very indignant at this and wants to know. He says this is a very one-sided panel because two people on the panel, so far, I didn't see the rest of the panel, so I'm not sure. He might be right. They may all have been talking about the need for people to actually contribute to the society that they exploit and or otherwise belong to. It was very interesting, an interesting exchange, and he was very upset. He wanted to know, what can we do other than taxes? And apparently the historian who's speaking here, who had some interesting things to say about, I guess, being very dismissive of the idea that the philanthropy of the world's wealthiest and most elite was enough to make a serious difference in worldwide economic inequality. And I don't know if you've been looking around, but I have not seen a huge dent made in that. But apparently that's the Davos model, is that philanthropy, personal philanthropy among the world's billionaires will take care of this. And it was very interesting to watch the exchange. And, of course, the historian pointing out, in the United States, you had a tremendous period of economic growth and success with higher marginal tax rates, much higher than they are now. And I don't understand why everybody wants to deny that thing happened. And our chair of Oxfam making another great point, which her name, by the way, let me see if I can pronounce the last name. Let's see, Winnie Byanyima. I'm not certain where the emphasis falls, but she tells a very interesting story, which I shared with those of you following Twitter in the morning, that an interesting story of her interview with, or at least Oxfam's interview and interactions with poultry workers here in the United States, which is by some accounts the wealthiest country in the world. discussing with them the fact that they have to wear diapers to work because they are not permitted to take bathroom breaks during the working day. And as the point she was trying to make was a counterpoint to the ex-CEO of Yahoo, who I guess has retired and gone on to bigger and better things like playing golf and criticizing people who tell the truth about the economic situation in the world. But she was saying to him, don't tell me about, because this guy pulled out the talking points of it's the lowest unemployment in history in the United States, and he even followed up with thanks a lot for this one, lowest black unemployment in the United States in history. And you care about that because you're black, right? The chair of Oxfam. Or, we're all supposed to care about that because black. We're so sympathetic, right? I don't know why. They love to keep pulling that one out there. Like, the very definition of unemployed people, black. See? Even they have jobs. It's amazing. I don't know why they think that's redemptive in any way. At any rate, she says, don't talk to me about unemployment rates. Talk to me about the quality of those jobs, the dignity of those jobs. There's no dignity in a job where you're required to wear diapers to work because you're not allowed to go to the bathroom while you're processing chicken. And of course, we all eat the chicken, so we all benefit from that. But wouldn't we be better off, by the way, if they could go to the bathroom and stay sanitary and clean and even wash their hands every once in a while? But I guess not. And, she makes a fantastic point. There's no dignity in a job like that. You were talking about human dignity. That's going to be part of the equation when you're talking about equality. Not just do I have a small pile of cash and have to go to the bathroom in a diaper, but, do I have dignity in my work and in my life? And am I treated equally? Do I have bargaining power? Can I get myself a bathroom break simply by talking to other workers and agreeing how we would like to sell our labor? But apparently, no, that's too much for the economic order of the world. I thought that was really a great point in that, she was saying to him, we're counting the wrong things, not how many people have jobs, but how many people have dignity in their lives and can make ends meet more than just one day's work at a time. That would be helpful also. I was curious, one, about the nature of the inquiry from the former CEO of Yahoo. On the one hand, I was like, he seemed baffled by the idea that there might be another solution other than the one he preferred, which would be philanthropy. And I don't know whether he had heard the story of the poultry workers or anything like it before. I was wondering what he does with his time. If he's a former CEO of Yahoo, how would someone who was the former CEO of Yahoo come across information about what's actually happening in the world and stories about how people live in places other than his house? I don't know. Maybe there's some way that information could magically appear on, let's say, the top of his lap or the top of his desk, where he might keep a screen to display such information. I don't know how he comes to Davos so blind to what's actually happening in the world, but he does. But another great point I thought that was made here is, if he was such a huge supporter of the idea that philanthropy would fix these things, that taxes wasn't, or tax avoidance even alone, which is a separate topic, wouldn't address this properly, or that it's not a legitimate avenue to address these ills. I was just curious, has anybody ever heard from one of these Davos going type people what sort of philanthropic effort they would suggest would intervene in a situation where employers were forcing workers to go without bathroom breaks, and their solution to it was wear diapers or you're fired? I'm like, what's the philanthropy? Free diapers? I mean, is that the solution that philanthropy brings to this? Or they might say, how could philanthropy intervene in this? You could give money all day long, but I mean, they're going to be working in these terrible jobs, but we could make microloans to them and they could become entrepreneurs and quit those jobs. I don't know what they think they're proposing to do in all of this, but I mean, I think what she's actually saying, when you boil it all down, is you at the very least, you have to get the governmental intervention on the behalf of the wealthiest out of the way. These workers are by law essentially. The system that we've set up for them forbids or refuses to protect their, what you would think would be inherent right to organize, to negotiate better working conditions for themselves. And this is done on behalf of the wealthy plant owners, essentially, who want to be able to exploit as many people as they can for as much money as they can. And there's no philanthropic system that's likely to undo that. All right. Anyway, I think that's enough preaching for the morning. It's now time to begin rounding up the other actual news. Greg Dworkin is here to help us with it from Frozen, Connecticut. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. My driveway is a skating rink, and preach it, brother. It's interesting. It's always interesting, and of course, quite relevant given the fact that yet another billionaire throws his hat in the ring. So
yes,
we get to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit of politics, and we'll talk a little bit about presidential aspirations. But then we also get to talk a little bit about policy because, like it or not, Howard Schultz's hat in the ring and his ostensible reason for running, which is to fight a 70% tax on his wealth. It's really 70% incremental, but for him, most of it is going to fall in the incremental bracket.
That's okay.
So good. Let him bring these issues to the table. Let him tell everybody the reason he's running for president is because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez exists. He's
amazing.
Obsessed with her like everybody else, and of course she's 29 and not running for president, but therefore he has to because that makes sense, right?
That's so telling on yourself. It's incredible. I can't fathom telling people in America that you were going to run for president because in the last 15 minutes I've grown quite uncomfortable. You know, how do you plan to run for president because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? That's nuts.
Well, the entire right-wing media machine apparently is built around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
I guess so. And so for the moment, yes, I'm reacting to the current sensation because I've thought about it so deeply.
Right. I was watching Ron Fournier make a guest appearance on Meet the Press.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, me too. So he was advocating radical centrism. Without getting into the specifics about how bad a candidate Schultz is. But in general, it was pretty clear that to many people, so-called centrism or moderation is really a cult. You know, in other words, the bill that's in the Senate that is, Senate one, the first one that the Democrats are trying to pass, has all sorts of things about voting reform, and, making sure that people have the vote, all the sorts of things that the centrists say that they want, responsible budgeting, you name it. But if it's sponsored by a party, it's no good.
Of course.
Right? Because if one party is the responsible party and the other party is nuts, then you've got to be somewhere in the middle. Otherwise, you lose your radical centrism.
I guess so.
And that's why it's a cult. You can't say, okay, well, the Democrats are doing it right here. Well, ask about the specifics in the bill. I don't really know the specifics in the bill, but I support what you tell me is in there. I really haven't read it, but I feel like we need a third party.
Yes, sure.
Why do you need a third party when the party right in front of you is doing the things that you just said you wanted?
I'm not the head of that. Yeah. I attribute it to the same, I guess, human factor that used to drive libertarianism back when they were a thing. I guess they're still around, but we need a third party because although I agree with one of the parties, I'm not the head of that party, and I can't become the head of that party. It's too late, and I'm not interested in heading the other party, so it has to be a third one so I can be the head of it.
Right. So that was rather an incoherent defense, but let's talk about some more practical defenses.
All right.
Of what's going on with Howard Schultz. At least that is to say, some more sensible analysis. This one comes from Jonathan Bernstein, public
Jonathan.
No, he's a political scientist and public figure who talks about these things in a sensible way.
He's a Jonathan.
Why take Howard Schultz seriously? Because he's rich, and it happens to be a good year for independent candidates. And as an aside, it reminds me of another column by a political scientist, David Hopkins, about why Nancy Pelosi gets credit for everything. I'll get to that one. I forgot to give it to you. I'll have to go find it. I'll do that while we do this, or maybe during the break. But why take Howard Schultz seriously? Because he's rich, and it happens to be a good year for independent candidates.
Is it?
Yes, and
Okay.
too long didn't read. Here's the
As long as
story.
it's true. Yeah.
Schultz is possible because Trump is weak.
Okay. I'll agree
Right?
that
When you
Trump
have a
is
very
weak.
unpopular incumbent, then everybody thinks you can draw hold your nose voters from that party.
I see.
And you figure that it's easier to do as an independent than it is to do as a Democrat, because Democrats will trigger the partisan, oh, I have to rally around my party thing, whereas at least in theory, an independent won't do that. And if you have an issue, he doesn't. Ross Perot did. Ross Perot was about outsourcing jobs, and that sucking sound you hear, sending all the money to Mexico in deficits. I mean, he had a thing, whether he was right about it or not, but he had a specific overriding issue that he was talking about. And that outsourcing job turned out in retrospect to be a reasonable thing to concentrate on.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So you had a relatively unpopular president at the time, George H.W. Bush, who, as it turns out, Ross Perot didn't like. And you had, going for a fourth term with the same party. So at the time, the conditions were ripe for a third party play. What you have now is a very unpopular president, and at least the idea that you could pull people from his party, because there may be people unhappy with Trump who are unwilling to vote for a Democrat. We saw that in 2016. Plus, Schultz has a lot of money, therefore he must be competent, therefore he must be qualified, therefore he's going to get himself on TV, because TV always puts billionaires on TV. They just do. Partly because the people who own the stations are billionaires, and partly because they're really interested in the idea that maybe this new guy who we don't know anything about is going to be interesting and controversial and say provocative things the way Perot did, because Perot made for good TV. So he gets automatic television, he gets automatic coverage, and he has a rationale for running, which isn't the one he gave. It's that Trump isn't popular. And that's why it's a thing, as opposed to let's ignore it and go on to the next 15-minute thing that I saw.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Now, there's other ways of analyzing it. Paul Waldman writes, what Howard Schultz's ludicrous candidacy tells us about the American electorate in the Washington Post. And he turns out that he suggests we have some insights into how presidential politics works. And what the challenge is for Democrats is they try to figure out how to defeat Trump in 2020. Waldman says you can criticize Schultz on any number of grounds. Okay. There's the narcissism shared by so many billionaires.
Yes.
There's the fact that he seems to have barely thought about how he might put his exceedingly vague ideas into action. That's funny, because I suggested yesterday on Twitter that he wanted to run as a third party, the vague party, where you say, I want to fix things, and you wave your hands, but you don't really get specific about what's your tax plan. Well, that's a hypothetical.
Yes. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, but he really actually did that. I mean, he's a terrible candidate. It was an awful rollout. He got horrible press for it, and then he announced he's not running yet. He's just considering it, and he'll announce sometime over the summer. Oh, which is what happens when you have terrible rollouts.
Excellent. Get back to me. Thank you.
Right. But the most important criticism of Schultz, Paul Waldman writes, to be lodged may be that the number of voters who want what he's selling is tiny.
Yes.
Schultz offers social liberalism on issues like LGBTQ rights, combined with economic conservatism based on low taxes, and scaling back social programs in order to reduce the national debt. And so he puts out a chart by Lee Drutman in 2017 and maps the 2016 vote on two dimensions, whether you're social identity or whether you're economic. Right? So if you're socially liberal and economically liberal, that's where most of the Democratic voters are.
All right.
If you're socially conservative and economically conservative, that's where most of the Republican voters are.
Mm-hmm.
If you are socially liberal but economically conservative, where does that really put you? There's very... yeah. There are some people who are in that dimension, but not that many. Extremely few voters. Most of those are third party.
I guess.
Now, if you are socially conservative but economically liberal, those are the populists.
Oh.
And that's a rather large group of people. and you can fight over those.
Economically liberal.
Right?
Huh.
So if you would like Medicare for all, but aren't rushing to make same-sex marriage the thing, and maybe have some doubts about it, but we'll go along with it because it's the law of the land, there's a lot of people in that category. Or let's look at it in terms of abortion. How do you feel about abortion? Liberal. I'd like it to be safe, legal, and rare.
Yeah.
And I emphasize the rare part. But I really want to support Social Security, and I really hate the idea of trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. I don't want it to see it overturned. I don't want to see it repealed. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot of people that fall in that category, and that is a battleground where you can run your election and argue about, am I going to emphasize social issues or am I going to emphasize economic issues? That's how somebody like a Sherrod Brown runs in a place like Ohio. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is a battleground. Howard Schultz is picking out the battleground of the people with the least number of voters, the least number. 4 or 5% of the voters are where he is. And so his constituency doesn't exist. And that's why he's going to have a very difficult time, unlike a Ross Perot, making a splash.
Well, does he know that?
I don't know
Has
that
anybody
he cares.
told him?
He's a billionaire, and he really has a rationale for running, which is different than what people are talking about in regard to why a candidate should run. He's not running because he says in his mind that Donald Trump is a weak candidate, although that's what powers the suggestion. He's running because he wants lower taxes on himself. He has said so.
Huh.
That Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and people like her make him uncomfortable. And that also, and the one that drives me nuts, is that the far left Democratic Party, and I assume he's talking about Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, make him uncomfortable. But especially Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because we don't know why. But mainly because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested a 70% marginal tax rate, which would hit him hard, and that's why he's running for president. What's the constituency for that? Davos.
I guess. Why isn't he there?
15 people. I mean, who else is going to rally behind that and power a campaign? It's just those people aren't there. The constituency isn't there.
Yeah. Well, I guess they're used to that. In terms of, the world keeps coming to them either for their money or their coffee or their advice because they have money. And I guess that he thinks he's popular because people can't stop talking to him or about him.
And besides, they drink his coffee. So if you want to summarize that whole thing, because it was too long and you didn't listen, the Daily Beast had a tweet that said, Howard Schultz blames Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for his decision to run as independent, and it has to do with her plan to tax the rich. And Adam Soward takes that and says, a billionaire running for president so he and other fabulously wealthy people don't have to pay more taxes is exactly what tens of Americans have been clamoring for.
And not least because obviously because it's unpopular, but also that's what you have now. So I'm not certain what motivates you to run, given that you've got what you want. What else do you want? I don't.
Well, somebody's threatening to take it away from you.
I guess, but the president isn't. And
no, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, so therefore he has to run, even though she's not running.
Yeah.
Because if that makes sense to you, you're not picking up on the fact that it's all about me.
I guess that's basically it. I don't know. All right. Well, I find that amazing. I find it amazing that anybody would think that was an attractive answer. That, again, like I said, that I'm.
Well, that's part of what made his rollout so terrible and why I say that he's a terrible candidate.
He is that, and the rollout has been terrible. And I'm amazed that he thought that a good answer to why are you running for president is, the last 10, 15 minutes of the hour here. I just, honestly.
Right. So he hired Bill Burton.
Amazing. Yeah.
To talk about why his candidacy made sense. And Bill Burton basically said, well, people need choices. It's the Ron Fournier thing. People need choices. And that's why I like the fact that Harold Schultz is running, because it really highlights some of the things that are like under the surface that we never talk about. So people need choices, Bill Burton says. You go to the store, you can buy 19 different products, and why shouldn't you have different choices in your presidential candidates? I mean, people need choices, and I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking political consultants need jobs.
I guess so.
I guess that's why you took that job, because there really is no rationale for this. And whether it's Jim Messina or Bill Burton or who's that fellow that was working with Paul Manafort and with Bernie, I forget his name, the Democratic guy.
Oh, I don't know. Who does that?
You can't
Pat
depend.
Cadell?
No,
he does things like that? I don't know.
But you can't depend upon the fact that political consultants who helped a candidate that you liked or used to like is therefore going to be working for a candidate you like in the future. That is not how it works.
I don't know who got that.
I hope people have learned that by now.
There are perhaps a few that do things like that, but you don't know their names, believe me.
Right.
So, yeah, don't. I'd be astounded if people were basing things on that. But
well, Steve Schmidt, who said all sorts of nice things about dumping on Donald Trump, is also going to sign up or has signed up with Howard Schultz.
Yeah.
But, these guys do this for a living.
I'm not certain why they're living. But, by the way, Tad Devine, is that the name you're looking for? Mad Hatter has pulled that one out of the hat.
Thank you.
Who else would do that for us?
Yes. Just because he's a Democrat doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, he must be there for honest and pure.
Right. Ned Devine was my favorite of the two of them, actually. Anyway, we'll be back in 2 minutes to discuss more about this. Hopefully not more about Howard Schultz, but I don't know. That seems to be the hot topic.
About Kamala Harris and policy.
Much better. Okay, because that's the hottest thing in politics today is not talking about Howard Schultz. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I just had to stop myself so I could do our introduction here. Coming back to the discussion, before we make a shift away then, I wanted to throw this one into the ring for consideration. I was telling Greg during the break, Matt Iglesias reacting to a Dylan Byers tweet, I guess, about Howard Schultz, saying that he almost certainly isn't going to win. But fiscal responsibility is a crucial issue and deserves to be front and center in the 2020 race. Because as with Sanders in 2016, Democratic hopefuls are making big promises without providing specific details, which is why he's for Howard Schultz, I guess, because of the specific details. I don't know. Anyway, with Matt Iglesias making the quite correct point that is very often overlooked, and we've been taught to overlook it, but saying it's interesting, as always, that journalists who consider themselves nonpartisan and non-ideological are very comfortable doing advocacy work for deficit reduction. That's not a nonpartisan issue. It's not a non-political issue. It's at the center of every political issue, and it's apparently at the center of how people define themselves as social conservatives, social liberals, economic conservatives, economic liberals. The overlap is incredible, and the browbeating that that the political elite, and sometimes used to be in both parties, and not quite as much today, but still remnant.
What John Carter calls the deficit peacocks.
Yes, and I mean it's not people who beat other people over the head with the deficit are doing it for very political reasons, and they feel like their justification is economics pervades everything, and so therefore it's not that I'm specifically beating you up over politics or policy. I'm beating you over the head with reality. That's economics. Well, economics is, I agree, is infused into everything, and I have very great difficulty separating the two of them and then separating them even further on the ideological spectrum. But it is amazing, as he points out, that it is somehow regarded as non-political or even apolitical or third-party-ish or third-way-ish to do deficit advocacy, even though the policy outcomes are almost always, almost uniformly, very political and very specific to a certain wing of the ideological spectrum. But it's perfectly fine for neutral, middle-of-the-road, balls and strikes, tell it like it is journalists to say, well, this biggest one overriding issue has to control everything.
As I said, it's a cult. And by the way, it's a cult because when you're really serious about deficit reduction, if for some reason it actually means something to you, it's nearly always because you have to cut entitlements, not because you have to cut military spending.
Yes, that's true. And
but what if the military spending goes up beyond budget? Well, you just have to suck it up.
Yeah,
well, what if you aspirationally want to talk about covering more people with health care? Oh, my God, we can't afford that. That's Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah. Right. And somebody has been sort of harping on, I don't know why in particular, Jake Tapper, but saying, I wonder, when is Jake Tapper going to ask someone who's for increased military spending or increased deployments or whatever form it takes, how are we going to pay for that? And,
exactly. Nobody ever asked that. That's what I mean about it being a cult. And that's why Joan calls them deficit peacocks. They don't really care about the deficit. They only care about the deficit when the other party's in power and they want to use it as a cudgel.
Yes,
and if you're a third-party person who's trying to wreck the Democratic Party for whatever reason, it's always a cudgel. And that's part of the reason why it's hard to pay attention to, even though there are legitimate issues that come up in terms of the mechanism, the policy part of how you pay for aging populations and so on and so forth.
Yes. The other thing it reminds me of, too, when people always go back to the deficit, it actually reminds me of that the quote we keep bringing up, or others bring up too all the time. Who was it? The bank robber. Why are you robbing the banks? Right.
That's where the money is.
Right.
That's Billy Sutton. Yeah.
Right. You want to pay for militarism or whatever it is you're into, then you're a deficit peacock largely because you think things have to be paid for one thing, but that's where the money is. Entitlements. There's billions of dollars in it. Let's get rid of it so we can pay for the thing I like. And there's nothing apolitical about that.
Right. The other side of the coin, though, of course, is that we had this ineffective tax cut that just occurred.
Yes.
Right? Trump cut taxes on the wealthier people, and he said it was going to stimulate the economy. It did none of those things. It didn't work. So did they rescind it?
Right.
Oh, we can't talk about that. That's raising taxes. Everybody knows you can't raise. Well, that
comes
stupid.
as no surprise. They're giving none away.
Right, exactly. Waleed Shahid, who in his bio was communications director for Justice Dems now, but formerly AOC and also Cynthia Nixon and Bernie Sanders, has an interesting observation coming from the left.
He may work for one kind of person.
He says, a fair number of 2020 candidates and campaign operatives come from the center-left establishment wing of the Democratic Party and lack experience defending the lefty policies they're endorsing, like single-payer, wealth tax, abolish ICE, Green New Deal, which is an interesting point. And part of the, 18, 19, 20 months of primary time is to work some of that stuff out. So it's not bothersome to me that, for example, coming right out of the box, Kamala Harris has a point of view. She turns out to be a very strong presidential candidate. And she was on town hall and she talked about the fact that she would like to see Medicare for all. And if that means, I'm paraphrasing her, I don't remember the exact quote, but if that means the end of private insurance, so be it. And that was an interesting marker in terms of, first of all, what she actually believes in an aspirational way. She later walked it back a bit and said that, you may need some incremental stuff to get there. and she's okay with other, suggestions that might get you to the same place, public option, et cetera, a voluntary buy-in, et cetera. And those don't lead to the abolition of private insurance immediately. Others want that immediately. But that area of policy now being staked out used to be too far fringy to even mention in public, and it would doom your candidacy. And now, by one of the strong Democratic candidates, it's the marker for where you might start. So, Hillary Clinton, when she was running, had public option as part of her health plan. So that's not new. It's not exciting. It's not different. But getting rid of insurance companies is different.
Yeah.
Does that mean you can actually do that? It's a sixth of the economy. You can't necessarily wave your hand and do that. I'm an incrementalist a little bit on that. And yet, having that as part of the discussion is a wonderful thing. Are people used to talking about it? No, they're not. Nor are the Jake Tappers of the world used to asking about it. So that's where you'll get somebody saying to Kamala Harris, if not now, then tomorrow or the next day, well, how can you do this? Because look at all the consequences of such a thing. It may cost money. It may cost jobs. It may cost this. Those very same questions that nobody asks when you're talking about military intervention.
Yeah, I mean, it may cost them. On the other hand, everybody could drive for Uber.
So, again, the range about those sorts of policy issues are pretty interesting. In fact, Dave Leonhardt has a column today in the New York Times, the Medicare for All trap. Most issues will strongly favor the Democrats in 2020. Taking away people's health insurance is an exception. And part of the reason that's such an interesting conversation, no matter how you feel about where it should be from a policy point of view, if you ask the public, most people think that Medicare for All means that I have the choice of going into it. That's what Kaiser Family Foundation polling says. If you tell them that, no, that means you don't have a choice, you will be in single payer and you don't have the choice of private medical insurance, then the popularity drops.
Okay.
That's where the public is. That doesn't mean that it's fixed. You can persuade them. You can teach them about why it might be a better system to do X, Y, or Z. But don't go in there expecting that as soon as you say the idea, everybody's going to love it, because what they're loving is a mistaken idea of what it is you're talking about.
Oh.
For right now.
All right.
Right, and that's why Dave Leonhardt says it's a bit of a trap. 56% of respondents said they favored a national plan called Medicare for All, in which all Americans would get their insurance through a single government plan. A large majority of Democrats backed the idea. A quarter of Republicans did too. But they were a lot less positive about Medicare for All. In fact, they showed why single-payer health care may turn out to be one of the few problematic issues of Democrats heading into 2020 if the party isn't careful. Harris has highlighted the tensions this week, saying on Monday she supported the most aggressive version of Medicare for All before moderating her position late yesterday. When Kaiser pollsters were putting together their survey, they understood that not all Americans thought of Medicare for All as meaning the same thing. So the poll asked people whether they believed they would be allowed to keep their private insurance plan under such a system. Almost 60% of respondents said yes. In reality, as HuffPost Jonathan Cohn wrote, one of our Jonathan Corner people, in an analysis of the poll, the whole point of Medicare for All would be to wipe away current insurance arrangements and replace them with a new public plan. Not only that, when pollsters described a version of Medicare for All in which private insurance was wiped away, support plummeted. The idea flipped from being popular to unpopular. 37% of respondents favored it and 58% opposed it. So that's part of the reason why Bill and Hillary Clinton's health care plan dropped in the 1990s, he says. And he's just pointing out that there are some vulnerabilities here. So you could do less problematic, still bold alternatives, vastly expanded version of Medicare. You can call it Medicare for All. You could suggest it's popular, make it voluntary, and then people will vote their way or select their way into making that the dominant system. But if you make it mandatory, you're going to split Democrats and unite Republicans. And as Brendan Nyhan says, if you do that, splits D's and unites R's, that is the opposite of smart politics.
What about if you explain to people that eventually it will become mandatory, but because you did it?
Well, who's it? John Maynard Keynes? In the end,
you
we're all
chose
dead.
it. Yeah, well, I guess.
In the long run,
I mean, you can all choose it. That's great. Everybody then begins to choose it, and then private insurance companies cannot sustain their business model because it's not popular,
That's
And-
okay. That's the incremental approach. Remember, I'm an incrementalist.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. That's different than as of the day after I'm elected, your insurance goes away.
Yes. Is there a lot of that?
A lot of
I don't face
accusations.
A lot of that. Yeah. Well, no, accusations we got plenty of. And there are
Yes,
a lot of
that's
people.
the point. Accusations are what people hear when they're
Yes.
trying to decide who to vote for.
Yes. Well, we have plenty of accusations. It's just the question of how many people are actually saying, "Oh yeah, sure, my platform is that your insurance goes away tomorrow." Yes.
Well, Kamala Harris said that, and she
then she
gets
didn't.
points for
After that.
boldness, but she did have to walk that back a bit, and Dave Leonhardt explains why. So that was that part of the policy thing that I think is quite interesting. I also included for your readers, when you sum it up later, this is a Kaiser Family Foundation piece,
All right.
Medicare for All and Public Plan Buy-in Overview and Key Issues. And there's like 8 different plans out there, and this kind of summarizes what they are. What do we mean when we say buy-in for older adults?
Yes.
What do we mean when we say federal public plan option? What do we mean when we say state public plan option? How would the proposals provide and expand coverage? It's really pretty thorough and comprehensive, and there is policy to discuss. Now, Brian Fallon was arguing with Dave Leonhardt and slightly me on Twitter today, saying that this is primary season and don't pick on Kamala Harris. This is the time to be aspirational. We have plenty of time to work out policy trade-offs after you're elected. But you can't get elected if people think that what you're proposing doesn't make any sense.
True. And so you change the thing.
Right. And so that's what's going on now. And it's all good and it's all healthy. And I would just throw in at the end, if people tell you this is another example of Democrats in disarray, I would say that's another example
Well,
of
that's
people
unfair.
who don't want to deal with policy, not understanding how you figure out policy proposals.
I guess.
It's actually all very, very healthy.
It's
I'm glad
it's
to see it.
choices, as a matter of fact. I was just told quite extensively in the previous segment that why shouldn't people have choices? Well, because if they have choices, then you're in disarray, and if you're in disarray, that's bad. Except
but
it's
we
only
don't have to write about
Democrats
that,
who are
so,
in disarray.
you know,
Yeah, there's
so
never
the-
Republicans
the media's,
in disarray.
The media's
or
going to write about what they're
independents.
comfortable with.
I guess so, and we need a
Billionaires are
synonym
smart,
for
and Democrats are
Yeah.
in disarray, and those are the two things driving these stories.
billionaires are brilliant. People like alliteration. We need a synonym for what do we say? Independents are idiots. Something, but I guess that just falls too easily off the tongue. It's amazing how the same people can be saying, "Well, why shouldn't people have choices?" All right, well, here's some choices. Oh my God, are you crazy? These choices you're going to lose. You're in disarray because of all the choices.
Right. So I'm going to throw another different policy thing at you now for something completely different.
Okay,
You can find it in the little list I sent you right under the policy corner. It's called The Debate Around Putting an End to All Government. And this has to do with policy process and what people are actually proposing. The debate around putting an end to all government shutdowns explained. It's from Vox. There's growing lawmaker support to end shutdowns once and for all, but these bills could have some negative side effects.
Oh no.
Can you imagine?
What? Let's not
They're
talk about
talking about an automatic continuing resolution.
it. Yes, all right.
Right, with the country still reeling from the effects of the latest stalemate and the whopping $11 billion in economic fallout, curbing future shutdowns is a move that's looking more and more appealing by the day. Doing so could have some negative side effects, however. While House Speaker, she's not White House Speaker,
Oh, I see.
while House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has signaled openness to such measures, House Appropriations Chair Nita Lowey and Majority Leader Steny Hoyer both argue such laws would cripple lawmakers' incentive to negotiate on spending. McConnell's open to considering something.
Okay.
So here are the bills that have been proposed. Okay. There's the End Government Shutdowns Act. This legislation from Rob Portman has the backing of 20 Republicans and would trigger an automatic continuing resolution for the parts of the government that remain unfunded by the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1st. In order to keep lawmakers motivated to continue spending negotiations, the bill would also cut government spending by 1% if they're unable to reach a deal after 120 days, and would continue to cut spending by 1% every 90 days thereafter. So the idea is that the government is automatically funded with a sunset provision, and during that sunset provision, you guys get to negotiate. That's their plan.
Okay. How about I'm going to propose the other way, that the government spending increases by 1% if they're unable to reach a deal.
but only for healthcare.
Yeah, I would do it across the board. That's fair enough. I just
Okay, we'll
again,
give you that.
yeah, we'll just point out that again, the deficit peacockism is centered in this.
Right. Mark Warner, on the other hand, proposes the Stop Stupidity Act.
That's a good plan. Sounding.
It's a great acronym. Everybody gives him credit for that.
Except he didn't do it right. But all right.
Also introduced the bill that would establish an automatic continuing resolution to prevent future shutdowns. Warner's bill does not include spending cuts and would not cover spending for the executive office and the legislative branch, so they can spend on themselves. In other words, you get your salary. Warner's bill aims to pressure both the president and Congress to arrive at a deal by depriving both of much-needed funding, but they still get paid.
Yeah, unless there's a constitutional amendment involved.
Meanwhile, in the House, 2 bills have been introduced that would cut salaries.
Okay.
The Solidarity and Salary Act. This legislation, spearheaded by Jared Golden, Dan Crenshaw, and Max Rose. So the center-left, center-right parts of the parties.
Yes, the eye patch guy.
That's Dan Crenshaw, and Max Rose is the guy that won on Staten Island for the Democrats. Would withhold pay for the president, vice president, and members of Congress during shutdowns in the same way the government workers would have to wait for back pay. Lawmakers would be forced to go without wages during these impasses. And then there's the Shutdown to End All Shutdowns Act. Another group of first-term House lawmakers have proposed a bill that would both activate a 30-day automatic continuing resolution and block Congress members' access to their salaries. Democrats led by Alyssa Slotkin, Chrissy Houlihan, Dean Phillips, and Colin Allred introduced a bill on Tuesday which would suspend pay for lawmakers as well as keep funds for White House officials. It would aim to protect government workers during shutdowns as well. So the new people are making their voices heard, which is interesting and welcome. But there are some potential drawbacks to the bills. One downside of an automatic continuing resolution is that they make Congress complacent, disinterested in negotiating. And the threat, of course, if you take their salary away, that might change. Additionally, the threat of a government shutdown has historically forced lawmakers to attempt to compromise on certain policy priorities, and without it, there could be a reduced impetus to do so. The problem with that argument, of course, is nobody's compromising in Congress these days. So, despite these pitfalls, lawmakers who are smarting from the negative effects of the recent shutdown could be committed to taking some action to reducing the likelihood of future stalemates. At this point, it's uncertain which route, if any, they'll take. I mention this because I've just heard a lot on cable TV, the very shorthand. Well, they're talking about preventing government shutdowns, and then they go on and move to some other topic without explaining exactly what they're talking about. These specific bills and the concept of an automatic continuing resolution is what they're talking about.
Yes.
How does that strike you, all of it, the whole big picture, the 50,000-foot view?
Unworkable and undesirable.
There you go.
I'm with Steny Hoyer on that, believe it or not.
Tell us why.
The largest impediment to compromise and negotiation that currently exists is the House Freedom Caucus and the Republican conference, really in both houses. And, for instance, right out of the bat, the first one listed is, to me, automatic incentive for Republicans to continue to refuse to negotiate over everything. Automatic 1% across-the-board spending cuts every 120 days. If you do nothing, what else do you think that they would do? They would do nothing.
They have incentive to do nothing.
Yeah.
Because that's where they're coming from. They want
I'm getting
government.
paid, and government is cut by 1% across the board every 90 to 120 days. I forgot exactly what they're.
Well, first 120 and then 90.
Yeah.
So you're paying me
to sit here and do nothing
to get what I want.
Yes.
What's the downside?
Right. So I can't imagine that changing the worst behavior that we already have under the current system would just be made worse by enacting that. I don't know where that comes from.
So any proposal that pays Congress is out.
Well, yes, and the other problem is that any proposal that says that they won't pay Congress requires a constitutional amendment, in my view, and you won't get that.
Ah, okay.
So now you're back to zero proposals, and start again, please.
Okay.
That's my, what view, what foot view.
Summary.
Yeah, I guess
right?
that kind of sums it up.
The parts that would work are a bad idea, and the parts that wouldn't work are not really worth voting for.
Yes, so I guess that leaves us stuck. Ultimately, the idea of, I guess you could try to rig something up, but maybe one of these does, to find some way of constitutionally, I guess, continuing to allocate the salaries, but somehow, here's how it is.
Put them in a lockbox.
Yes, right. It could be, what's the procedure that the police currently use to confiscate your property?
They impound your property and then sell it. Or whatever.
Right. Yeah, we could do that with we're paying their salaries. It's just that we're freezing their bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
The salaries are going into the accounts. The accounts are frozen. They can't even live off of their own income during shutdowns. Oh, well, all right. I guess that still passes constitutional muster. We could try that. How many votes for that? 0? Huh.
Right.
Well, that's the end of that one. What else do you got? It's not that I can't get to 67. It's I can't get to 1. So there are some very unworkable things involved in that. But, it doesn't surprise me that the newly elected are trying that one. It costs them nothing. They can campaign on saying, I have a bill that would prevent Congress from being paid during a shutdown. No, you don't. You have a bill that would be ruled unconstitutional that says that. And then you would not only lose in court in front of everybody, but then get all the money. So I don't like that as a proposal, but it's good politics. They'll get lots of votes for it because no one will discuss the fact that, the problem is we guarantee their salaries in the Constitution, so sorry. But whatever. No one wants to talk about that one. And that's why I would say, literally, I would say you got to have on the table the option that, not that it would get any votes, but if you wanted to bring the people who drag their feet to the table, then the way to do that is to say government spending increases as long as the shutdown goes on. Then they would be panicked and interested in doing something. They are proposing absent shutdowns. These people are proposing across-the-board cuts as enforcement mechanisms. Why would they work to keep the government open if you gave it to them if they napped for 2 years? That's nuts. So.
Yeah, it is crazy. But, everybody understands the impetus for this.
Yeah,
and it may be that none of this stuff passes, or if it does, for some reason, pass the House, doesn't get through the Senate. But at least people understand where these bills come from. Yeah. Now, I don't know how close the media is going to focus on these or pay attention to, other than, okay, they were suggested. Like many proposed bills, they get mentioned once and then never again, especially with all the other stuff that tends to happen in this news cycle. But, just for your listeners' complete edification, it's always nice to go over these things in detail sometimes.
Yes. Well, you have to consider them. And we've just had our hearing on the bill, and now we can mark it up and vote on whether or not to bring it to the floor. I think no, but, and they may overrule me and they want to have a vote on these things on the floor.
Right. So one of our very loyal listeners was objecting to the fact, Thelonious 08, yes, that nobody's actually proposed a law abolishing private health insurance, and that's true. They haven't.
I would not want to.
It's just that it came up in a very public town hall by Kamala Harris, who's been tagged with that. So I think it's very worthwhile discussing because of it. She's, again, one of the leading candidates on the Democratic side for the presidential nomination, and I think that what she said is going to drive quite a good deal of discussion, which it should, because, it's nice talking about policy for a change instead of how corrupt Trump is. I like it.
Well, if it ends up with Democratic candidates saying, well, I think eventually, like we said, you'll all opt out of it, and enough of you will opt out of private health insurance that it will no longer be an economic viability.
That's fine.
That's your fault.
If you want to think of it as an Overton window kind of thing, where if you talk about it, then you get to talk about less radical stuff to you that nonetheless becomes acceptable. That's all cool too.
All right. Well, as long as I haven't followed, so I can't be sure that nobody is proposing turning off private health insurance tomorrow. I would think that would be problematic, and I bet they do too. But I guess if someone's got it, we ought to talk about it. But I haven't seen it yet.
Right. Again, there's the aspirational discussions of policy, and then there's the nuts and bolts actual policy descriptions. They are different spaces, but they complement each other.
Yes, True.
All right.
Yeah,
the last thing before I go, I'm
Okay.
going to take you right to the 10 o'clock hour.
Okay.
Is interesting piece here by Peter Baker in the New York Times highlighting the fact that there is a growing chorus, as the headline says, of Republican critics for Trump's foreign policy. They think pulling out of Syria and Afghanistan would be a debacle. They think North Korea cannot be trusted. They think the Islamic State is a threat to America, and they think Russia's bad and NATO's good. And the trouble, of course, is their president doesn't agree. But more than 2 years into the administration, the disconnect between President Trump and the Republican establishment on foreign policy has rarely been as stark. Those are divisions. They don't do Republicans in disarray because it's not alliterative.
Yeah.
In recent days, the president's own advisors and allies have been pushing back. And then, of course, they had this public intel conference with Congress yesterday that talked about the fact that when you ask the heads of the intelligence agencies, they all agreed with the Republic they are and agreed with the Republican policy establishment that they are members of, and that they didn't agree with the president on any of this stuff. And by the way, they didn't even talk about the wall because it's not really a crisis, even though Trump threatens to shut the government down in 3 weeks and declare an emergency over something that his intelligence people don't really think is an emergency.
You just haven't seen the movie.
The growing discontent among Republican national security hawks was evident on Tuesday, that would be yesterday, when Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, effectively rebuked the president by introducing a measure denouncing a precipitous withdrawal of American troops from Syria and Afghanistan. Okay. And, same day as the intelligence chiefs led by Dan Coates talked about a radically different assessment of the world compared to Trump. And, it's unclear where that's going to go, but the breaks with the president have to start somewhere. So let it start there.
I guess so. I'm glad they're breaking with him, and I don't know. I guess we have to take it. Yeah, here we just have to put it out there on the table.
Right.
Okay. Put it on the table and say, there it is. This happened, and some of it we greet with glee. Others of it we think will be meaningless. But either way, thanks, Greg. I guess you got to run off now, eh?
I do.
Okay.
It's all yours after the break.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're in our 10 o'clock hour, our second hour of the show. Greg on his way to work and Joan McCarter on her way in, I'm sure. And, I don't think nothing's gone haywire, right? Since we've been on the air, I'm going to check Twitter and make sure that, nuclear war, none about that, et cetera, et cetera. Seems fine. Okay. And, so I can, I think I'll go ahead then, with my normal expectancy for Joan's arrival. So, all right. Let's see. What else is going on here? There's a lot of discussion going on in my notifications, but I think I might just be a bystander to some of this. No idea. All right. Well, let's see. Yeah, I can't see anything else happening at the moment that would distract us. Let's see. We can take a look back. I think we actually I guess I summarized, I thought maybe too succinctly, but I can't think of any other angles to give you on why automatic continuing resolutions as a permanent solution might not work. It might be, you know what? Here's just to save the idea, because there's the germ of a good idea in there. I guess. And if you wanted to experiment with it, I really don't know why you would give away 1% cuts across the board as an incentive to deal. It's not. And it's no surprise that it's a Republican, Rob Portman, who has brought forth the 1% cuts across the board as time goes on option. I assume he would love that. My presumption is that he would insist that he's not the kind of person who would be glad to sit on their hands while the government was while spending was getting cut 1% across the board, as this was going on. Then Mark Warner, the Democratic senator from Virginia. Well, there's two, but the one who brought forth the similar automatic CR idea, but no automatic spending cuts. So that's in keeping with what we would expect, although it's in keeping with what disappointed us in the first segment of, and then again in the second segment of today's show, which is that the Republican position is, yes, let's cut spending because eke the deficit, even though, and we didn't really get around to mentioning this in all of our discussions of deficit peacockism, is if you were really a fiscal conservative in the sense that these idiots mean fiscal conservatism when they say things. In other words, cutting entitlements and, oh my God, the deficit, and we can't pay for anything, et cetera, but we can pay for defense, blah, blah, blah. If you were really that kind of person, actually, then, of course, you presumably would have to be a Democrat, not a Republican, because there's been no period during which unified Republican government has ever cut spending overall or lowered the deficit. So if the deficit is your top priority, you have to be a Democrat. They're the only party that lowers the deficit. But you're not. And in fact, if you were one person I know of who's prominent in the news right now, who has insisted that they've been a lifelong Democrat and who declares deficit reduction their top issue, has just famously left the Democratic Party behind, allegedly, and declared himself an independent candidate for president. So it's nonsense. Don't vote for anybody who makes the deficit their primary issue. It's not going to work out for you. If you are scared about the deficit and the national debt and you would like to see it reduced, traditionally you should be talking to Democrats. Now, I guess the difficulty with that is the Democrats that those of us listening to the show right now or later on as a podcast like to vote for are the ones who are increasingly saying, to hell with this deficit, it doesn't mean anything. So I suppose it's problematic in the sense that there are still a lot of Democrats. Well, there's still a lot of Republicans. Maybe it's not problematic. I was going to say it's problematic because there's lots of Democrats still who say, oh, no, the deficit matters to me and I'd like to see spending reduced, because they're still sort of under that spell. So aren't we creating problems for ourselves? Aren't we in disarray if we begin to campaign on the opposite premise or something approximating the opposite premise? On the other hand, the answer may be, well, Republicans have held together pretty well on the premise that they are worried about the deficit and that they will cut spending, despite the fact that they have never cut spending overall and have never, therefore, been able to reduce the deficit, even by $1, ever, for the past 30 years, despite that having become their party's mantra. And yet, they're still there and still voting as Republicans for the most part. So that isn't a problem. On the other hand, Democrats are the people who are in disarray. Republicans are the ones who are unified. So comparing the two parties doesn't make any particular sense. And that's also interesting. I guess people have to have choices. One party hangs together no matter what. The other party will not unify no matter what. A third way, people want choices about it. A party that will sometimes stick together and sometimes not, because Americans love predictability. And obviously, our business people, who we are reminded constantly, business loves predictability, will flock to and run as that party, which is sometimes this, sometimes that, because they love predictability so much. That's how much our system makes sense. It's terrific, right? We're working really well. I mean, this is the one place in which I'm willing to sign on with the everything's broken, our party system is stupid crowd. And it is stupid. And oh, well, now what are you going to do? Nothing, I guess. What a great solution I'm offering all of you. All right, let's see. So the other bills in the Vox piece, I mean, did they address anywhere, even just in a brief mention, there are some potential drawbacks to all these options? Do they discuss the problem of like the constitutional guarantee of congressional salaries and presidential salaries, or no? I don't see that being discussed. Let's see. One of the potential downsides of an automatic CR is they could make Congress complacent and uninterested in negotiating. We've talked about that. Oh, yes. Well, I was going to say, I never did get around to one way that you could experiment with this idea of automatic something. And then I guess we got off into the tangent of one party suggests automatic cuts and the other party, you would think in a normal system, if you said we have a two-party system and they oppose one another and the solution usually comes out somewhere in the middle, right, for our centrist fetishists, then you would probably, in talking to an alien who comes down from space, and if you say to them, okay, now given that that's the case, and there's one party that says we ought to have automatic spending cuts across the board if you can't come to a budget solution, what does the other party say? And they would say, that is easy. I have learned U.S. American English in order to tell you this. You will have another party. Physics predicts, the universe predicts, that you will have another party offering an equal and opposite reaction. That's just physically true. And the Democrats, as you call this other party, will be offering a program of automatic spending increases across the board in the event of no budget solution. And you are wrong, you stupid alien. That is why you lose every movie war you have with us. And how you can come to us with advanced weaponry and still be defeated by viruses and bacteria. The answer is one party will cut the spending across the board. The other party will do nothing. And in some sense, that's true. Now, if I guess if the Dalai Lama had come down from, or some Zen Buddhist had come down from the spaceship, they would have said, obviously, the options are doing something versus doing nothing. Those are the two options. It's not cutting versus increasing, it's doing a thing versus doing no thing. But that's not really it either. I couldn't tell you why. And of course, by the way, if centrist fetishists were correct, then the true answer would be, of course, cutting spending across the board by 0.5%. But that still incentivizes the wrong people because it doesn't mitigate the cutting. It mitigates the number by which you cut, but it doesn't mitigate the fact that you're cutting. There is no way to halfway cut something. You can cut something by half, but you can't sort of cut it, but also sort of not. That's not a compromise solution. Democrats do themselves no favors by not being on the other side. Anyway, nobody appears to be interested in proposing across-the-board increases, even though that's the thing that would make people uncomfortable. And it would work, too, because it would drive Republicans crazy. That's why they won't vote for it. They could not stand by and allow that to happen. But I would say that the reason it might work is because apparently Democrats can't stand it either. And they would be freaked out about having mean commercials be run against them for increasing the deficit, even though no one seems to be interested in running commercials about how Republicans increase the deficit and Democrats don't, but okay. That's where they are. I'm not certain, why that happens, and maybe we have to talk to political scientists about trying to figure that one out. All right, let's see. The other ones, they really just don't. What's the difference between these two from the House members? One would withhold pay for the president, vice president, and members of Congress during shutdowns. How, I'm not certain, but that's what they say. In the same way that government workers have to wait for back pay to come in after shutdown, lawmakers will be forced to go without wages during these impasses. And I guess they think, it looks like they think they pass constitutional muster because the pay would be there. And you could argue that it's still consistent with the 27th Amendment because in the end, they'll still get the pay. It'll just be delayed. And I suppose that's true. I mean, like, for instance, what happens if, since they're now toying with the idea of holding the debt ceiling hostage later on, if you were to hit the debt ceiling, could you I mean, I guess you would be able to rearrange finances such that members of Congress would get paid. Or at that point, do you say, well, complying with the Constitution is actually a lesser problem at the moment than stabilizing the United States economy and the world's integrated economy, given that the United States has lost all of its borrowing authority? Maybe. I don't know. But at any rate, I guess I wonder if that's the sort of thing that, I guess if you hit the debt ceiling, how they would arrange for members of Congress to get paid so as not to violate the 27th Amendment. I don't know if they'd think that was important. It is, but I don't know where they would put it in terms of priorities. Let's see. The other one here proposes both a 30-day automatic continuing resolution and block Congress members' access to their salaries. How? I don't know. If they aren't able to reach a deal after that time has elapsed. I guess you just need to look at and you could, I mean, maybe we'll do that offline at some point, or take it up later on in the week, just to take a look line by line at the actual legislative language that the House proposals use and see if we think that it overcomes the constitutional prohibitions. I'm thinking here again, just to be clear, about the 27th Amendment, with which some of you might not be familiar. It's actually our newest amendment, despite the fact that it was apparently proposed along with the Bill of Rights. So it was some 200 years in the making. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. In other words, a current Congress can't effectively legislate away legislate through any variance in their own compensation. And I guess it's up to the courts to decide whether delaying it is a variance or not. It's not just giving yourself a raise or cutting your salary, for that matter. I guess the original design was, well, you can't vote yourself a pay raise and get it before you have to stand for election again, or at least before the House of Representatives would have to stand for election again. And I guess senators get away with that one, maybe because the original language was written before the Senate was popularly elected, but maybe not. I am not sure as to why the Senate gets a pass for that one. They should basically have to stand for election themselves as well. But maybe that just made things too complex, or maybe, like I said, they didn't contemplate that because they weren't popularly elected. So something perhaps explains that. Okay, so one last thing I would say. Oh, dear. Look, now I can't read you anymore about this because somebody claims that it's absolutely necessary that I update my Flash player right now. That seems incongruous with what Vox would be advocating to me. Anyway, I guess I'd throw out this one more thing just before we drift off the topic. If you wanted a test run, remember I was going to come back to this one. If you wanted a test run of any one of these things, but if you wanted to test the incentives to negotiate and how they would be affected by either automatic 1% spending cuts across the board, or 0%, or 0.5%, or for that matter, increases across the board, or anything like it. You don't have to lock it in permanently as a matter of statutory law. You probably could do, I'm trying to think through whether you could do the same, with a standing order of the House and Senate that would implement this for the duration of the 116th Congress, the current Congress, essentially. And that, but you would still need to have the force of law in order to, but I guess as a matter of incorporating into the rules or the interpretation of the rules with a standing order, something that would deem passed a continuing resolution with the following conditions would be doable. And then that order would expire at the end of the Congress, and you would have, of course, the option of renewing it in the next Congress if it worked fantastically, or if you never got a chance to test it because you were so scared that 1% spending cuts across the board could happen, or that they wouldn't happen and that nothing would happen, or that increases would happen, depending on what you adopted. It may be that you never got around to testing the theory, but you might want to renew it in the next Congress, either because you didn't get a chance to test it or because it worked so well. And if it sucked, which is what I think would happen, you could modify it and come up with another test. I don't think you have to enshrine this statutorily because you don't have to. I don't think you should, because I think the conditions will change from time to time in Congress, and the impediment to negotiations, the focus, the focal point, the foci, I guess, can change. And it may not be at some future point that the greatest impediment to negotiating over the budget resides in the most conservative wing of the most conservative party. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon, but these things do evolve over time, and you might as well work with it as a standing order. On the other hand, I don't know whether you'd get the votes for either of those things, either fixing it statutorily or by standing order. I suppose it's possible that some people would be so insistent on doing it statutorily that they would oppose a standing order on policy grounds and say it was too weak a measure, although why you would, well, who knows, why you would shy away from saying something that will be effective during this Congress and that is totally renewable if it remains effective and is tweakable if it requires tweaks, why you wouldn't go that route. But I guess if that sort of thing made sense, then we probably wouldn't be in this position in the first place. So, all right. Anyway, I think we can be done with that topic and move on to some others. Let's see. Where shall we turn to? You know what? Here's news of the day that we haven't had a chance to bring up, but I think is important in our background. A lot of chatter about it this morning. A Reuters report is what I have handy, and I guess I have to because it says it's exclusive. I never know whether that's really true, but they say, Reuters says it's an exclusive. Foxconn reconsidering plans to make LCD panels at Wisconsin plant. That's Reuters for you. The headline is boring and makes you think right off the bat, this is not news in which I'm going to be interested. However, if you read into it and you read what people are tweeting about it, you'd get a better headline out of it than Reuters is willing to do. But here's the basics. Here's the balls and strikes of it, and then we'll show you if we can figure out what it means. You already know what it means. Foxconn Technology Group is reconsidering plans to make advanced liquid crystal display panels at a $10 billion Wisconsin campus, and said it intends to hire mostly engineers and researchers rather than the manufacturing workforce the project originally promised. So, hiring engineers and researchers is a good thing. But, so why is it a bad thing? And the background in all this is Scott Walker's Wisconsin, which is no longer his, is what we're talking about here. Foxconn, of course, the giant technology manufacturer that was essentially promised all sorts of amazing tax abatements and tax breaks if they would bring all these fantastic jobs to Wisconsin. And it was worth the money that taxpayers were shelling out to this corporate entity because they were going to be employing who knows how many thousands of people to make these fantastic liquid crystal displays, which we assume to be a good thing. And, well, as it turns out, once the promises are made about giving away the money, and by the way, the person who was spearheading the negotiations and making that promise is no longer in office, poof, it all disappears. Now, I'm not certain whether, monies were forked over to Foxconn and they're just reneging, or they're just saying, well, you don't have to pay us the money either, or at least not all of it, but we're just going to change our plans. But once again, everyone who wants to run government like a business, here's how it runs. It changes its mind. Remember, it's nimble. It needs to be able to change directions at a moment's notice because the economy moves at the speed of light, etc. And so imagine your government doing the same. If you can't imagine it moving at the speed of light, imagine it changing its mind all the time because business loves consistency so much. Here they are, business becoming consistent in their demand for whatever the hell they need at this particular moment. Now, the stain of this reneging spreads beyond Scott Walker, in case you were upset that he's not going to be around to absorb the pain from all of this, because it was announced at a White House ceremony in 2017, because Donald Trump staked a lot on this too. Announced at a White House ceremony in 2017, the 20 million square foot campus marked the largest greenfield investment by a foreign-based company in U.S. history and was praised by President Donald Trump as proof of his ability, Scott Walker was pissed about this, I'm sure, to revive American manufacturing. Foxconn, which received controversial state and local incentives for the project, and it says in past tense, received, initially planned to manufacture advanced large screen displays for TVs and other consumer and professional products at the facility, which is under construction. It later said it would build smaller LCD screens instead. And I guess people figured, well, you still need workers to build even smaller ones, right? And it's not necessarily the case that the larger the screen, the more workers are necessary. I don't know. Now, though, those plans may have been scaled back or even shelved. Louis Wu, special assistant to Foxconn chief executive Terry Gou, G-O-U, I'm not certain how that's pronounced, told Reuters. He said the company was still evaluating options for Wisconsin, but cited the steep cost of making advanced TV screens in the United States, where labor expenses are comparatively high. Yes. In terms of TV, we have no place in the U.S., he said in an interview. We can't compete. Seems like that should have been thought of a little earlier in all of this. When it comes to manufacturing advanced screens for TVs, he added, if a certain size of display has more supply, whether from China or Japan or Taiwan, we have to change too. That's basically means nothing to us. Rather than a focus on LCD manufacturing, which is what this was supposed to be all about, Foxconn now wants to create a technology hub in Wisconsin that would largely consist of research facilities along with packaging and assembly operations, Wu said. It would also produce specialized tech products for industrial, healthcare, and professional applications, he added. In Wisconsin, we're not building a factory. You can't use a factory to view our Wisconsin investment, Wu said. What does that mean? Can't use a factory to view our Wisconsin investment. I think that just means we're not building a factory. That's not what those words mean, but I think that's what he meant. Earlier this month, Foxconn, a major supplier to Apple Incorporated, reiterated its intention to create 13,000 jobs. This was earlier this month. 13,000 jobs in Wisconsin, but said it had slowed its pace of hiring. The company initially said it expected to employ about 5,200 people by the end of 2020, next year. A company source said that figure now looks to be closer to 1,000 workers. Which figure, though? That I'm not sure about. You mean it will employ 1,000 by the end of 2020? Or is the 13,000 jobs that they intended to create now down to 1,000? It is unclear. They say it is unclear when the full 13,000 workers will be hired. So essentially they're saying, oh yeah, we still intend to create 13,000 jobs. We just won't be doing any manufacturing here. And the 5,200 that we said would be hired by the end of next year is down to 1,000. So we intend to create 13,000 jobs here. It just won't be until the year 3852. Is that still acceptable? Can we still have our money? All right, sure. Wu, in the interview, said about 3/4 of Foxconn's eventual jobs will be in R&D and design, what he described as knowledge positions rather than blue-collar manufacturing jobs. Foxconn is formally known as Hon Hai Precision Industry Company. And that's a far cry from Foxconn. I'm not certain exactly where that comes from. I wonder about that. Anyway, Rather than manufacturing LCD panels in the United States, which was the whole premise of this thing, Wu said it would be more profitable, believe it or not, to make them in Greater China and Japan, ship them to Mexico for final assembly, and import the finished product to the United States. Yeah, it probably would be. He said that would represent a supply chain that fits with Foxconn's current fluid good business model. Yeah, it probably would. It's just not what we were told. Heavily criticized in some quarters, the Foxconn project was championed by former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, a Republican who helped secure around $4 billion in tax breaks and other incentives before leaving office. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is joining us, and this is part of the issue here. You're joining us from Oakland, California. You're on hand, I guess, going to be doing some work at the main offices for Daily Coast today?
That's it.
That's the plan.
The whole content production team.
I see. And they
is here just to check in with each other. It's kind of nice to remember that there are a lot of us now.
Right. And they're all over the place.
The elections team is on board too, which is really fantastic.
All right. Excellent. And so you'll all produce content together in one room.
In one room.
Yeah. That's different from the way we usually do it. But I guess, it's nice every once in a while to remind yourself that there's other people doing this work and get to know them. It does help
to see them face to face. Although it is very strange to be. We're still using our communication system, our remote Slack system.
Oh, yeah.
And we're here just furiously slacking each other back and forth, when we're 3 feet apart.
Yes. So. You need to have an electronic record of all this stuff. It's like being at Netroots Nation in a way. At least in the old days, we're all sitting on a couch in the same space in the exhibitor hall and still communicating electronically. I could just turn to you and say this, but why would I do that? I would like to get carpal tunnel syndrome and fast, so let me continue to type. All right, well, what sort of content do you predict will be produced today? Or will it be, you think it'll be reduced content because you'll all be busy talking with one another? Or no?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We're trying not to let that happen. We have the beast to feed, and we're still working on that. So
yes, all right.
And that means, of course, thinking about the next government shutdown.
Yes.
For me,
we need to get ready for that. It's just 2.5 weeks away now.
2.5 weeks for 16 days. Today's the 30th. Yes, 16 days. Trump furiously tweeting away about
what's he doing
his
today?
wall. Caravans. There's more caravans. There's 3 of them now. I hear.
Oh, competing. Well, people have to have choices. I learned that from Howard Schultz today. Or Bill Burton, I guess, working for, is that his name? Working for Howard Schultz. So good. It's 3 caravans for all 3 ways that we do things in this country.
Fox and Friends says so it must be true.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, so 3 caravans coming. He's tweeting about that this morning. I haven't noticed, thankfully. But
yes.
Is he sure? Is this something he saw in a movie? Is it real?
This one was Fox and Friends.
Okay. Oh, they say.
All right. That's the ultimate authority.
Well, they have the pulse, finger on the pulse of Latin American culture at Fox and Friends. They know. They have friends who tell them the caravan is coming. All right. Well, welcome, Caravan, I think. Why not?
Bring your taco trucks with you.
Yes, right. I've been waiting for those. Still plenty of corners available here in the United States. Streets are paved with gold. Come in.
Yep. Paved with pico de gallo, salsa, sour cream, whatever. Just come on in.
Plenty of room, and we could use it too. And they'll be needed to feed government workers in a couple weeks.
Yeah, in 3 weeks' time.
Okay.
What I'm wondering, couldn't they just really quickly, I guess it depends on whether Trump would end up signing them, pass all of the other outstanding bills that they've agreed upon?
And
leave DHS conference apart.
Sure. They could have last time. Maybe the sentiment is different.
I guess, yeah. But it seems like if the Senate is serious, if McConnell and Senate Republicans are serious about saying we're not going to do this shutdown thing again.
They are saying that.
The way to do that would be to take most of those hostages away and just let the conferees on Homeland Security funding do their job.
Yes. Well, I guess it would
What do I know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if Trump could be convinced that the leverage of shutting down the government isn't what's working, at the moment, and never can be, then yeah, there should be no reason why they don't do that. I wonder how seriously they take that threat in the Senate, or their own threat, because I don't know. That's actually a lot of work to do to pass the. Of course, they could roll them up. How many bills have they got outstanding? 6.
It would be 6.
So roll up 5.
They've done them before.
Yeah, and pass it.
House already did it, in fact. Senate could just take what the House has already passed.
Oh, well, yeah. Again, that was the case for a long time. But now the incentives have changed. For whatever reason, I guess it would be easy to imagine McConnell says, all right, we're going to do it the president's way once. It probably won't work. And then we can say, we tried it your way and it didn't work. And that's the sort of thing that even he can grasp. But have you seen any? I haven't seen any movement beyond the House in doing that. So
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not certain what I'd be looking for in the Senate other than, okay, let's have spent this week on this. What have they done instead? I don't know.
They finally passed Rubio's Mideast. Well, they didn't pass. They got it post-cloture.
Ah, okay. So
the really bad Israel stuff, along with some Mideast security, blustering to Trump.
Okay.
McConnell had been using that. I think they had voted on it 4 times during the shutdown, and Democrats blocked it every time. He brought it up again, and this time they passed it.
Well, okay.
It got past cloture, that is.
All right. So that's the huge and pressing business. I guess they can spend next week on it, but I guess if we don't, it's already Wednesday, so in 2 days' time, if we don't hear McConnell say that next week's schedule is a minibus, then we have our answer.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to do it. I don't think he's going to do it.
Well, okay. Now what?
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
Just a nice thought if he was serious about not having another shutdown. And I don't think anybody but Trump wants another shutdown.
And so I don't know. So now I'm at a loss as to how to read McConnell.
As usual.
Yeah. I was discussing with Greg a variety of proposals that were written up in Vox about legislation to put an automatic CR system in place to prevent shutdowns, although I don't think any of the ones that were described were workable for various reasons, including the idea of it's like laying out a seafood buffet for Republicans. If you don't come to an agreement, there's across-the-board spending cuts. That's
right. Well, of course, that one was created by a Republican.
Right, yeah.
That's not going to happen. McConnell has expressed some interest in doing it. Pelosi has not ruled it out.
Mm-hmm.
It could conceivably happen. Whether Trump would sign it is another question.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a terrible idea. Warner's is the horrible, horrible acronym aside. Warner's Stop Stupidity Act.
Yes. The thought's a good one, but
is probably the least damaging.
I guess so. Now, yeah, I mean, none of this removes the necessity of the president's signing it, so you could send him all the automatic CRs you want.
Right.
But he doesn't have to sign them.
Right.
So that doesn't fix it. I forgot about that. I didn't even discuss that part. Oh, so here's a bill. Yeah, I know, but here's the thing. If I don't sign it, we're shut down. Oh, yeah. I was just focused on our inability to come to a agreement.
Well, and this is where, one of the things Warner does, he does try to address that by saying, yeah, the executive branch doesn't get any funding either.
Yeah. So
the legislative and executive branches don't get their continuing funding. It's cut off, thinking, okay, this is how we bring everybody together.
Appropriated funds, freeze them.
I guess it depends on if we have another shutdown, how bad it gets, what Trump does presented with the next bill,
Yeah,
and what the capacity of Congress, particularly congressional Republicans, is to just keep putting up with this.
I guess.
I mean, there always is the veto override.
Yeah, I mean, it's been there, and they're afraid to use it for some reason. I don't know whether it's because they think it will work or because they think it won't. But
because they're entirely in the thrall of Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it might be that they would refuse to let it work. I mean, it can work. If you do it, it will work. I mean, just vote. The government will open. But yeah, you're afraid to go against Trump.
There's reason. The Trump organization has taken over the RNC pretty much entirely.
Yes.
So.
Oh, well.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, the Kochs have broken pretty much entirely away from the RNC and Trump. So you do have, if you're a Republican, some leverage there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to get your money from the RNC.
Yeah, and they won't have that without.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So, we could end up seeing 2020 being the election that the Kochs really take on Trump within the Republican Party.
I have a hard time envisioning that.
I do too.
Yeah.
But they are not pleased.
All right. Well, I mean, normally good. I'm glad they're displeased. Although, I don't know. I would like to read a little bit more about the source of their displeasure exactly, and be sure it's a persistent one.
Being cut out of the RNC. They'd had the data agreement. They'd pretty much been underwriting the whole operation, and it had been their pollsters, their voter ID effort, their whole infrastructure essentially was underpinned by the Kochs.
Right. Okay.
And they're pulling that out.
I see. All right. Well, we'll see what they do with that, and whether that's something they can.
Yeah, whether they set up a competing shop to try to get congressional Republicans on board.
Interesting.
That will be interesting to see if it happens.
Yes, disruption. We need to have there needs to be an alliterative way of saying that Republicans are in disarray, though, because otherwise it won't get printed.
Yeah.
So everyone can.
It does sound nearly as much fun.
No. All right. What else is occupying time? What's on the radar for the day or
Well, we're having some fun, at least.
That's good.
In private, I don't know how much time we're going to spend on the front page on Howard Schultz, but
Okay.
and I know that you and Greg had some fun there too.
Yes. Well, everybody is, and no one can stop. That's the thing. I'm sure he, like Donald Trump, thinks no one can stop talking about me, so
Yeah.
I'm doing well.
It's like going back in time listening to Howard Schultz speak. He totally does not understand 2019.
Apparently not. I am astonished that he thinks it's an attractive position to say, I have decided to do this momentous thing because the last 15 minutes of listening to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have been so trying for me.
Yeah.
I mean, presidential
That's
ambitions.
a really, really dumb thing to be honest about.
Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, I can't even believe that it's true. It's just, I guess he's trying to capitalize on her fame, but I just, to me, the idea that somebody would say to me, I just decided to run for president a couple minutes ago, and especially for this reason, a brand new, newly elected member of Congress who has been in Congress for like 2 weeks, and is one of hundreds of members, has made me run for president, leave the Democratic Party, though I swore to you last week I was a lifelong Democrat. Like, oh my, find me the lifelong Democrat who says, I didn't know that Democrats would occasionally have different ideas about taxes. This is crazy. I'm out of here. Like, wow.
And by the way, I'm a billionaire.
Yeah. Right, in case I didn't mention that. So I had plenty of money to keep track of these things. Yeah, and, of course, nobody likes the look of the billionaire saying, I'm so worried about paying my fair share for things that I have to leave. But that's incredible all by itself.
Seattle knows all this very well about Howard Schultz.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like
now,
when the city didn't give him his new basketball arena, and so he sold the Sonics.
Huh. So, yeah, I don't know that much about him. And so maybe here we have a real parallel with Donald Trump. Like, the New Yorkers always knew what Donald Trump was about. Mm-hmm. And everybody else, I guess, thought he was the apprentice guy. I
think a lot of Seattleites, I mean, he's been bad for Seattle. A lot of people are not particularly excited about Starbucks there.
That's true.
And I think a lot of people see Schultz as the first Bezos, that the whole Starbucks thing was sort of the thing that kicked off the whole Amazon thing, and that has not been good for the city.
Yeah, I can see that.
In terms of, infrastructure, in terms of affordable housing, in terms of the ridiculous kinds of money that they've poured in that most of the city does not get, the hardball that they play when it comes to doing anything in terms of trying to rezone for affordable housing or for transit. Yeah, he doesn't play nice at all.
Well, no surprise, I guess. I mean, that's the way most of these billionaire types are, and it's the way they become billionaires very often. Yeah. But yeah, and I guess he just figured that the rest of the country would see him as benign coffee guy.
Yeah, I think the rest of the country might. Seattle doesn't.
Yeah, well, we need to hear more from Seattle, and that's probably a good idea in general, even minus the coffee thing. But, how interesting. I wonder whether that will begin to... I mean, it didn't begin to spread with Trump. Will we learn our lesson, or do we need to spend time on it because he's such a long shot, or do we learn that lesson with Donald Trump?
I think it's important that we pay enough attention to him now to humiliate him, if we possibly can, to make him an embarrassment. Just because it's fun.
Yeah, well... Yeah, I'm sure for Seattle residents it will be, and I guess we'll all enjoy the rest of it. But yeah, it needs. We need to know more about him, I guess. And at the same time, I wish we knew less, and that he would be an automatic disappearance because no one was interested. But I don't think we can take that risk anymore.
We have to tell future billionaires, we have to tell Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, no, we don't need you. We don't want you. Go away.
That's true. That's a good point. And I haven't heard quite as much about his running for president as we did for a brief time. There was that he was making tours and of places and going to Iowa and things, and it was very frightening because how could this be happening? Is this really all you have to do is just visit Iowa and everybody starts talking about you as a presidential candidate? If you're a billionaire, I guess. Like
if you're a billionaire.
If I visited Iowa, people would not say this. Although I can try. All right.
I'd vote for you.
Hey, thanks. I mean, or damn it, don't do that. What are you trying to do to me? Yeah.
Well, you know how stuff is supposed to work, so that's good.
That's a step ahead of him, for instance, and a number of other people. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else is I guess. I mean, other than the shutdown, I can't imagine concentrating on anything else on the congressional beat. But
there's not a lot else happening on the congressional beat. Mm-hmm. No, it's true.
All right. Well, that's fine. We don't have to pay attention to them. They're not paying any attention to us. So, anything else that's occupying time for you, or just fun topics of conversation around the office that others might be covering?
What else are we talking about?
Yeah.
Conference committee starts for the shutdown to avoid the next shutdown today.
Okay.
Trump tweeting, of course, all of his ridiculousness about caravans. So, one of the things that's interesting is everybody out there talking about, well, this is where we get our immigration grand bargain. This is not going to be where we get our immigration grand bargain.
Oh. All right.
The team of conferees on both sides is made up of appropriators. We don't have judiciary committee members. We don't have, it's all the appropriators. They're looking at the money. They're going to focus, I think, as much as they can on how much border security funding there is going to be and where is it going to be targeted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's not going to be a wall because essentially Nancy Pelosi says it's not going to be a wall and Democrats are not going to do that. We've already agreed to twice $1.6 billion in border security fencing, basically, which means some physical barrier, some more electronic surveillance, repairing stuff that's already there. Twice the agreed amount between negotiators, House and Senate, has been $1.6 billion. That's what passed in the omnibus in 2017.
Okay.
And it's what they agreed to in committee last year. So there's our baseline.
So likely to see something in that neighborhood again?
I would think so. Or, if they go up to the $5.7 billion, it's not going to be on a wall. Maybe it'll be $5.7 billion and lots of new judges. Maybe $5.7 billion and a huge upgrade in facilities for asylees.
Yeah, so
there's going to be a real effort on Democrats' part to focus on the humanitarian aspects of this.
What kind of guarantees do we actually have about the way it's spent if you're dealing with an administration that doesn't particularly like the rule of law, let's say?
Well, yeah, that's the problem.
Just nothing. We just have to roll. I mean, this is what we have to work with. Yeah. You just put it out there and say, this is the restriction that's on it. I believe you'll try and violate it, at least in spirit, and we'll test a lot of that in court.
Well, and this is one of the things that I need to get back to from during shutdown time. Mark Warner's effort to say, hey, look, we see you not following the law in trying to force people to come back to work without pay. And we're calling you on it.
Yeah.
But, that's one senator. What do you do when you have Mitch McConnell who's going to enable everything?
Yeah, I don't know, and it'll be difficult to. We did do a little bit of discussion in the last couple of days, and I think we hit some of it yesterday. The idea that Congress might maybe have standing to sue about a situation where, for instance, money is appropriated for X reason, and the president insists that he is able to use it for Y reason. Some of that authority actually exists, and it will depend on how much money he wants to use and how much variance there is between the stated purpose and his purpose, and whether he moves it between departments. But it's a big question mark. Where if we say,
because the National Emergency Declaration is still pending out there. I mean, that's still something that could happen.
And even I think absent that, I suppose there's a certain amount of reprogramming that is permissible, just sort of out of hand. But a limited portion of the budget, but maybe enough to siphon enough funds off to do something. And I guess we're not entirely guaranteed then that.
Well, we know that Trump's attitude is, here's this pot of money.
Yeah.
That's called the National Treasury, and I can play with it as I see fit.
He does think
he pretty much thinks everything's a slush fund for him to be able to point and say, spend it there.
So I assume he will try and do that, and there's some possibility that the Congress could sue, but I wonder if the chances are diminished if one half of the Congress, the Senate, says, no, we think it's fine. And only the House disagrees.
I think chances are pretty good that one half of the Senate does that.
Yeah.
Since, one half of the Senate said, yeah, it's pretty much fine that Putin is playing in our presidential election and is trying to get Trump elected.
Yeah.
One half of the Senate being represented by one corrupt senator from Kentucky.
Yeah. And plenty who go along with him, but he's willing to take the heat for most of it. But I mean, they've approved everything so far. They continue not to have anything to say on either side so far, although it's still early on the House side, about taking emoluments. And that's something I really wish the House would move soon on and say, at the very least, here's a resolution that says the Congress as a whole cannot be said to have approved these acceptances of these emoluments because we're definitely against it. Whether that would do the trick, I don't know, but
I don't think it would do the trick.
No.
Maybe that's not why they're doing it. Maybe Russia's a lot sexier. You have to admit.
I guess so.
We had this conversation in the office yesterday.
Yeah.
Some folks saying, I know emoluments, blah, 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 but Russia. It's like, well, there's also the Constitution.
There is that thing.
Yeah.
And
it'd be kind of nice if somebody stuck up for it.
Right. And it's not that far off the axis of Russia, considering who's doing the bribing. I mean,
right.
I guess if we were able to make the country once, against all good advice, swallow the idea of an axis of evil, I suppose it could happen again. It's just the axis is bribery. This is all. And I mean, we're all watching it.
You should always keep in mind Al Capone.
Yes, that's true, right? We're reminded by that of Greg all the time. If you can get him on tax evasion, you might as well go ahead and do it. True.
Emoluments is Capone's tax evasion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Could be.
True. So imagine it, all the prosecutors people telling Elliot Ness, no, wait for Russia. That's the second. Wait for Italy. I don't know what it would be exactly, but right. Russia at that point probably not the focus, but yeah, I mean that would be people saying get them for the murders, get them for the for the other racketeering activities, but instead tax evasion. It did work.
It worked.
He was syphilitic, and I'm not certain that Trump isn't. So maybe this is the parallel we need to explore.
The parallels just continue.
If I could put him on an island prison, I would take the shot at doing it.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic, even though I mean, would that be good? Would that be considered like a point of pride in the San Francisco area to have them in Alcatraz, or like don't dare put them here like Yucca Mountain thing? Not here, no. I don't know.
Yucca. Yeah, let's send him to Yucca.
Okay.
Good
Yeah, we
plan.
could. That wouldn't be a bad idea. I'd seal him in the salt mine. Are you opposed to
Yeah.
that? No.
Yeah.
Okay. So all right. Very good. Excellent idea. Now we've really produced some content. You can feel free to use. Thank you, Joan, for
You're welcome.
coming by. Say hello to everyone for us.
I
and,
will. I
and
will.
Good luck producing that content. Maybe you want to chat, using your vocal cords a little bit.
I might exercise my vocal cords today.
Excellent.
Yes,
Okay.
Beyond with you.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing that here, and we will talk to you next week. It's not too crazy cold there, is it?
Now,
Everything's okay? All right.
now we're fine.
Very good. We got all the cold weather. We'll
I'm
share
sorry.
it with you. Yeah.
Stay warm, folks.
We'll do our best. Thanks again. Talk to you next week.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Do stay tuned, of course, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy over there on that same West Coast where Joan is now, with Justice Putnam coming up next. Let's take a look at what he's got on his menu. The Iowa House's decision to deny press credentials to influential political blogger Laura Balin should be of some interest, and in focus next.